yeah, so welcome. We're really excited to have Layla Saith Hassan with us today, who leads in Digitas, and she's been a ally of WORAN since the beginning and has presented to us in the past. But since then, her career is even more has even had more of a sort of an upward trajectory. So we're really keen to hear more about her leadership. Layla is going to talk to us for about half an hour, and then there'll be plenty of time for questions. So yes, we'll let her get going. But before I hand over to Layla, I just talk a little bit about WORAN. I think everyone on the call is familiar with WORAN, but as a reminder, we're the Women in OR and Analytics Network. I'm the chair, Catherine Kent, and we have a range of sponsors that help us put on these events. Our events are usually online and usually happen on the third Thursday at 1:30, but we deviate depending on various circumstances, hence today's on a Friday. But yeah, we've got lots of stuff that WORAN get involved in, events being one part of it, but we'll be at conferences so we can catch up in person with people at conferences. We also have a mentoring subcommittee, so we're looking into mentoring, and in fact that's one of our upcoming events in the new year. So I think at that point I will stop sharing and let Layla take over.
Okay. Oh. I think it just needs yours to stop, and then it will let me, I think.
Fabulous, thank you.
While we're sorting that out, can I take the opportunity to say that our next event will be an international Christmas social on the 6th of December with women from Europe and Wisdom, women from the States in their organisation WORMS, and women from South America from their organisation Alio. So thanks. Oh,
we had it and then it's gone again, Layla. That's
There
it. Perfect.
That's it.
Brilliant.
And it's in full screen.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, hello everyone. Nice to meet you. My name's Layla. Thank you for the introduction and for having me here today. I am from a company called Digitas, which I will go into in a little bit of detail in a second. Most people may not have heard of Digitas, but I imagine you've heard of my parent company, which is Publicis Group. A little bit about me though first. I am Australian. I've been very fortunate to work globally in data and different data roles, starting in Australia as a data consultant, spending several years in New York and also in Atlanta, before I spent a few years in Paris, and now I call London home. Over that period, I've worked on lots of different brands and lots of different problems and industries, being the nature of being service side. So everything from big global brands like IBM, American Express, and Nestle, all the way through to smaller regional brands and even charities and not-for-profits. I'm now Chief Data Officer at Digitas, which is part of Publicis Group. And what that means is that my role spans how we use data as an organization and how the business solves problems operationally and organizationally with data and how we make decisions, but then still how we offer data solutions and services for our clients, which is typically from a marketing perspective, but often we describe almost any problem as a marketing problem because at some point a brand will interact with a customer or a consumer. And so therefore there's a role for us to play in how data drives some of that experience or what they see. So Digitas is a creative and technology and data shop. We build experiences, we do media, we do advertising, we do marketing, and we do this globally. We have offices throughout the entire world, and we work on lots of pretty great clients, I think, which gives us exposure to lots of different things. Some of the broader kind of work that we do as an agency is everything from enabling any of the digital experiences that you might interact with from Formula One. So if you're a subscriber or you see the races on your phone or on the web, we actually handle all the data piping for that and make sure that everyone has that experience. And then we also do things like running the end-to-end analytics for organizations like Samsung. So we drive end-to-end from paid media all the way through to their digital experiences, the data and analytics that empowers that, and the decisions that happen off the back of it. That aside, and if we think about just my role as kind of the data side of things, where this conversation really kind of started and why I'm here today is a few years ago, I set out to build the most diverse STEM team in the world. And I did that for a few reasons. One, the solutions that we're creating and the products that we're developing from a data perspective are incredibly influential on the world. And if we're building data solutions and using data to drive decisions, but we're doing it in a way that we are full of bias and we are full of blind spots and we're not reflective of the communities and the markets that we're developing solutions for, then I don't think we've done a particularly good job. And for anyone that's ever read anything like Invisible Women, you understand that, you know, just not having people in the rooms and seats at the table results in poorer outcomes. And so from a data perspective, I wanted to build a team where those blind spots didn't exist because we represented and reflected the markets that we were in. Because we are a service provider, most of our clients don't have capabilities that reflect or look like or sound like or represent the communities in which they serve. So by working with us, we are able to develop solutions that are ultimately better for their communities. And this in turn makes us more profitable and more successful because the solutions we're delivering are better. And beyond just doing that today, my goal for the future was, I know not everyone is going to stay in my team forever, and I don't want them to stay in my team forever. I want them to go on and build their own teams and work in other organizations. And so the capability that we've been creating is something that solves a problem today, but also should change the world in the future, just because we're feeding other STEM capabilities and companies with people that have come up in a safe place where we want people from different places and different experiences and different backgrounds. So this ultimately led us to kind of about a month ago, which is probably one of the proudest achievements we've had. And this is where I was invited to come and talk to you today. We ended up winning Data and Analytics Team of the Year. And we did that because our entry demonstrated that the capability in the team that we had was diverse, and that diversity led to better outcomes. It led to better outcomes for our clients, and it led to better outcomes for us as an organization. And so you can kind of see a few of us like quite happy on this very lovely stage, Camden Roundhouse in London. And then on the right, you can just see our Christmas party last year, where we all kind of went out in our data and analytics hoodies and kind of played escape rooms, which was quite a lot of fun. So I'm now going to spend the rest of the time talking about the team and then talking about how we did this and some of the things that we learned along the way. So there's about 85 of us. There's over 60 in the UK, and we also have a satellite office in India. We operate as one team though, very much with the work and the processes that we have being interchangeable between the two. I'm going to predominantly talk about the UK team. Just as you would expect, the UK team is different from a representative standpoint than the India team, and that's what we're affecting change in today. The India team is working on different axes that they need to address, but today I'll talk about what we've done in the UK. So firstly, we say that we are many, we are not all the same, and together we have a very large breadth and depth of skills. So as you've already guessed, diversity is incredibly important to us, but it's diversity of people, but it's also diversity of capability. And the reason we say that is because we're trying to solve multifaceted problems in a world where things are changing every single day in this space. And the way to keep up with those changes is to make sure that we have the breadth across quite a lot of things. So there's people that are really deep on certain types of tools, languages, processes, and solutions. And then there are people that are quite broad that sit across that. So we have T-shaped people and I-shaped people. And together, that's how we are able to continue to evolve and to continue to stay abreast of everything. We work with some amazing clients from a data perspective. And as you can see from this, the brands are very different and they all have very different solutions that they require from us. And it can be everything from building a segmentation to building a recommendation algorithm or building something incredibly strategic, like how does an organization use data as its entirety? And I'll go through two examples in that. The main set of skills that we prioritize around though are data strategy, AI and data science, MarTech enablement, intelligence and insights, and then engineering and automation. As you can see, we don't say OR, and that's because our clients don't really buy OR from us, but it sits in some of the different things that we do. And it's, I think, an interesting evolution in what are the services that clients and people are buying. So a lot of the AI and data science work, you could very easily argue is an extension of OR. And the same can kind of be said from some of the data strategy and insights and intelligent work. So quickly, I'll give you two examples that are the literal extremes of what we do. So the first is the strategic approach. So we work with Haleon and Voltaren, and they didn't know how to use data throughout the organization to be able to deliver better experiences, but also to be able to answer the questions that they have around how they use data and what's important. So everything from what are the decisions that they need to make off the back of data to what are the experiences that they're putting in people's hands through to what is the product research and development that they need to do. And so this very strategic approach was, how did they as an organization transform themselves to be able to do those things? And it was very, very pragmatic. And it was just a process of going from, where do you actually need to get to from a data perspective? What have you got? What is the priority of things that you need to get done? And then therefore, what's the tools, technology that you need to be able to do that? And then over a year, we kind of chipped away at those use cases. We chipped away at the technology. And then we ended up handing this actually over to Haleon as they took it beyond Voltaren and made it all brands from a consumer facing perspective. At the other end of things is, so we are very lucky to work on Battersea, and we have built the matching algorithm that helps match people to pets. And this is an ever-evolving algorithm that we've developed. But as you can imagine, this brings us quite a lot of joy. And it is one of those things that is always talked about, and the kind of data science and analytics that sits behind this isn't uber complicated, but actually it solves such a need in that we get so many people wanting to adopt pets, but actually you need to make sure that it's the right people adopting the right pets at the right time. And then when there aren't pets or there isn't a match, what is the next thing that you kind of give to people to ensure that they're still having a relationship with Battersea, that it just might not be a relationship where they adopt. So as you can see, two extremes, one very strategic, one quite technical. And then we do absolutely everything in between, which is very fun, but sometimes a little bit chaotic. So where we started and kind of where the journey was initially, a couple of years ago, so when I first joined, we had a really, really high churn rate. It was around 40%, which at the time there was a data and analytics skills shortage of about 200,000 every year. The government had recently quantified it, and we were hemorrhaging people left, right, and center. against that. And we just couldn't retain the talent that we needed. We were 27 people at the time across both offices, so much smaller than we were when we are now. From a proportion of people that identified as female, it was actually pretty good, but we went, could it be better? And at the time, we weren't actually tracking anything around people's ethnicities or religions or anything beyond kind of gender. And we did that because we were part of Publicis Group, and because Publicis Group is French, it is illegal to track any of those axes in France. And so that just fed to all of the different markets that we just didn't track those metrics. So we still now are tracking it, but it's not a mandatory tracking. That's the thing that has changed, because as I'm sure everyone on this call knows, if you don't measure something, then you can't actually improve it. You can't change it. So that was one of the biggest things. So that's where we started. And then we went through this kind of learning of how do we change it? So the next 5 tips are the things that we did and what we learned and what was important and what wasn't important. But first up, before we get into this, I actually wanted to do a Slido, and I'm hoping it will work. So if everyone can scan this, it should take you to a Slido. I'm really curious, given that we couldn't track anything a few years ago, and therefore we weren't changing the needle of anything. I was wanting to know what axes of diversity you're currently tracking, and if we were the exception to the rule or not. So it looks like everyone was doing better than we were. So that's good. Amazing. All right. Thank you, everyone. It's really interesting to see what the differences are and to see what's come up as kind of the main one that people are looking at. So I'm going to go through how we've managed to change some things. We began by saying, if we want to change the world, we have to change the pipeline of talent that's coming into the industry. We knew that there were broader programs that were existing in the market. So the level 4 and level 5 data apprenticeship had come online and was becoming something that was being picked up by different organizations. And then boot camps were starting to proliferate. We realized very quickly that in this market, there were quite a lot of organizations that were doing this for profit, and spent a bit of time trying to work out the right partner that would be pulling talent from a diverse range of places. So we know anecdotally that people that come into STEM are already a relatively homogenous group of people, because the requirement to go to university already filters people out of potentially getting into STEM subjects. And so we wanted to remove that initial barrier, because when we looked at the work that we were doing, you didn't necessarily need to have a university degree to be good at the role. A lot of it you could actually learn on the job or through these apprenticeships and programs. And even some of the maths where we think, oh, no, you have to have a background in maths to be able to do this. A lot of what we do, you don't need to have university level maths to be able to do it, or you can actually learn it on the job, or you can learn it through some of these apprenticeship programs. So we ended up partnering with 2 organizations, one being Generation, and Generation, interestingly enough, are actually a not-for-profit. I think they're an offshoot now of McKinsey. They were founded about 8 or 9 years ago, but they run boot camps around STEM. But the way that they pull people into their boot camps is to look at people that have at least 2 barriers to the job market. And then they find these candidates, and then we can go through a process of pitching our company, and then we interview people, and then we bring them on. And once they've done this 12-week boot camp, they know the basics of different coding languages, the basics of BI tools, the basics of some of the math skills that you need, but it's not super advanced. We then also pull apprenticeships from Multiverse. And multiverse, again, both of these are partially funded through grants, but the entry requirements, because it's not for profit in the way for some of the other organizations are, the candidates that they get through are much more reflective of the United Kingdom than perhaps some of the for paid ones. And that we then pull people through either on the level 4 or the level 5 data apprenticeship. And the level 5 data apprenticeship is effectively a tertiary qualification. And it's quite difficult. The people that have gone through the level 5, it gave me flashbacks to my master's, and I did not enjoy it at all. And I'm very glad that I don't have to do that again. This though, we then went, if this is how we're bringing people into the industry, we're no longer going to be going to things like university trunk days. We're no longer going to be requiring university degrees as the initial requirement. We've removed it from all of our job applications. It doesn't exist on any job application now at any level. We also then went, what's the entry level +1, and let's stop hiring at that level as well. And we'll just let our team shape change over time as we bring in people at entry level and then they get promoted up. And that's what's happening. So 4 years ago, we started these partnerships, and we now have about 25% of people in the capability that have come from one of these 2 programs. They've all started being promoted up, and we're bringing in kind of the 3rd and 4th and 5th iterations of this. But at the time, this was quite scary because we had to go, instead of bringing people in from the usual routes that everyone's really comfortable with, we had to try some of these. And there's another partner on here that we tried and it didn't work. So they're not a partner anymore, but there was definitely a bit of test and learn about how you actually do that. And this has meant that the data skills shortage doesn't actually affect us as much because we've constantly got this pipeline of talent coming through and we're growing it ourselves. The next thing that we had to look at was the current talent that we've got. So once we've got all of these people in, what is it that we do? So we went through this really big exercise of reclassifying all of the skill sets and aligning it to what was in the job market. So we as an organization named skill sets, titles, and roles according to our view of the world, but they didn't actually align to what existed in the market and how that had changed. And we also had to look at the bandings and this salary bandings. And this was quite a big deal because when we sat down and looked at it, you know, people weren't getting paid fairly because they were disadvantaged by either staying for longer or not realizing that they could negotiate harder. And you could see it. You could see in the roles some inequity in how people were getting paid. And so we went through the exercise of creating bands for people, or for roles, sorry. And then over the next few years, we got everyone into those bands. And now when we hire people, even if they tell us a salary that they think they deserve, if it's out of band, we'll give them the banding salary and we'll just say, you haven't asked for enough. This is actually what we're prepared to pay you. And it kind of flies in the face of the sector that I come from, because marketing and advertising is generally around how can you do this in the most efficient way. So getting our organization to agree to the fact that we were just going to start paying people more, even if they hadn't asked for it, was quite a big thing. The next thing we had to look at was how we learned. So there wasn't a huge amount of consistency, and how people were building networks within the capability was really kind of slapdash. So we ended up creating, we call them classes. We've got quite a lot of people that are not from the UK in the team. And so when we say classes, it doesn't have the same emphasis that I think it does to people from the UK. So it's still named TBD, but it's effectively the levels of everyone having a level, and every level having a space where they're allowed to go out and work out what the problems are for themselves and then feed that back up. A lot of people a few years ago were just suffering in silence, I think is the best way to describe it. And now that we have these cohorts, it means that even those that don't feel like they can speak up, at least in the safety of their cohort, they're able to have their view heard in a way that they don't feel like there's going to be backlash to it. We also then started to look at learning development externally, so bringing in other providers that were meeting specific needs that we had. And then I think one of the biggest learnings that we had is, as the department started to change, the way that we interacted and socialized had to change, because again, in my industry, it's very focused around what was done 50 years ago. And the show Mad Men is not entirely, it's not far away from what we were 5-10 years ago. But if your capability all of a sudden isn't a bunch of men that are very happy to go drinking all the time, all of a sudden you have to build interaction and socialization in a way that everyone feels included. And then also, because we'd been targeting more women and those that identify with women, it meant that, and even though this is ultimately not the end goal, a lot of women have childcare duties. And so doing things after work, it didn't work for them. So we actually now only socialize during business hours. All of our activities are that you can drink if you want at some of them, but alcohol is the very last thing that you do. And I cannot stress how different this was 5 years ago. I mean, every social event was go to the pub, get pissed. And now we might have a lunch or an afternoon lunch. And if you would like to have a drink, you can have a drink, but it's it's a very minor thing. And this was a huge shift. And it actually took someone coming up to me and they just said, I don't want to do this because I don't drink. So this isn't interesting to me. And I'm the old school advertising. So I've grew up in the Mad Men era, and I was like, what? And actually it was a massive shift when we changed that. And now everyone feels included and people can come because it's in work hours and they don't feel like they have to stick around. And interestingly, we all get a budget at Digitas, our Publicis Group. So per person, you have an entertainment budget. And we never spend ours because we're not filling our social occasions with alcohol. So we have those hoodies that we were all wearing. We got them because we had all this money left over because we don't drink. And we get to do extra activities because when we go out, there's only so many mocktails people are going to order, and it's just not centered around alcohol. So the money is getting spent on events. And this was such a huge change for my industry, and the rest of my company still can't quite get their head around it, which I find fascinating. But here we are. The next thing that we looked at was innovation. So we looked at how we could use different tools internally, but then also how we could use different tools externally. So we ended up building a solution called a non-CV, which strips out the identifying characteristics in a CV. And this actually gets used at Digitas, but it also now gets used at Publicis Group. So it strips out things like where you went to university, what your first and last name is. It strips out kind of things around some of the qualifications that you have. And that's what we now do internally. All of our CVs also go through a check to make sure that we're not using language that is exclusionary or biased or would drive one group of people to apply for a job over another group of people just because of the language that you use. And this is now in all of our processes. And then we also think about just us as an innovation group. So we spend a lot of time trying to evolve and work out what it is that can make us better for the future, and why. And having those different perspectives gets us to some of these solutions in a way that I don't think if we were a homogenous group, we would be able to get to. And just being able to bring lots of different people together around some of these ideas, again, I think is something that clients seek from us and is a differentiator that we have. The next thing that we do is safety. So being okay, being ourselves. We have a few things, and actually this isn't just from a Digitas perspective, but this is wider. But we have things called brave spaces where periodically someone will be open to having a conversation where they kind of explain something in their life that perhaps is an experience that we could all benefit from understanding more, but perhaps don't have the opportunity to have that exposure to. So some of the topics that people have felt comfortable sharing have been, how do you come out as gay in a traditional Asian family when they just don't recognize and accept that? And she was an apprentice in data, and to this day, I just think it's the most exceptional thing I've seen. It allowed people and parents to ask her questions about what would have been a better way to have gone about it versus how her parents had done it. And it just ended up being this really open session. There was another session where a few women talked about fertility issues and how that affected them. There's been sessions on menopause and what that looks like and how that affects them in the workplace. There's been sessions on male mental health specifically, and the stigma and the inability, well, I guess not the inability, but the discouragement of a lot of men kind of expressing their mental health and their struggles and what that means. And just having that option and opportunity for other people to understand and ask questions in a way that you can ask questions where you go, I don't want to offend, but you know, sometimes there are questions that you don't know if you can ask, but you really want to know the answer to. Gives people an avenue. We ended up working with a partner called the Human Library, which I highly recommend. And it's a organization that it kind of does something very similar, but they bring in people from everywhere, and it's someone coming in and expressing their story. And those sessions have just been transformative, I think, for those that have been part of them. And then we have different groups internally. So we have Embrace, we have Viva Tech, which is a women's network, and we have lots of other different initiatives that we have from a group and Digitas perspective, but then also from a team and capability perspective. And then we spent a lot of time working on our team values, and these were for our team. So the team sat down and they came up with them. I actually wasn't a part of it. They told me this at the end and said, this is what our values are. I'm like, great, I like these. I really like these. And we now look for these when we're hiring people. So do we think that they're naturally aligned to this, or are they going to come in and really struggle with this? Or do we think that they want to be this, they just don't know how to be this? Like, do people align to this? And if you start to change the types of people that you're looking for to it not just being about the hard skills that they have, but it's about what do they value and do their values align with our values, you slowly start to build this momentum within a capability where it just becomes self-serving and self-defining. And just having these and kind of chatting to people and going, do we think they're going to be accountable when they're doing things, like, or are they going to shift blame on other people? Like, because we need accountability. We can't kind of be honest and open about these things if we're just shafting. And the same can be said for the other ones. Like, will this be something that they're okay with? And then finally, expectations. So the other thing that happened quite a lot in our industry is that your mates would get promotions, your mates would get the good work, your mates would get the promotion. And unfortunately, it being a very homogenous place, it meant that the mates looked like the mates that already got it. And I had this quite a lot as I I had this, the first chunk of my career was very much like this. It was like, I didn't look like everyone else. I didn't sound like everyone else. And therefore I felt like I was always missing out because it was friends giving their other friends their opportunity. And so we spent a lot of time creating a competency framework. And as much as I think it's annoying sometimes, everything goes back to the competency framework. So do we promote you? Do we give you opportunities? Do we give you a performance evaluation where it's not great? Everything goes back to the competency framework. And people will go to their managers and say, I've gone through the competency framework and this is where I think I am, or I don't think I'm getting enough opportunities in this area. So how do I work on that? The other thing, I think sometimes there can be a perception that when you're trying to build out a capability aligned to kind of diversity, that you're going to let a lot of things pass. I think that we have one of the most competent capabilities because we will not accept people that are below the average. And we just go back to the competency framework and go, where are you struggling and why, and how do we get you to a place where you need to be? And if you're not there, then what's the change that needs to happen? What do we need to do better? Or perhaps like this actually just isn't the right fit for you. And that's also okay. But having full transparency around how people get opportunities, how people get promotions, and then when things aren't going well, why they're not going well, has created fairness that just I didn't see 10 years ago, because it was all done in a pub at like 6 o'clock on a Friday. So, and that's changed now. So what has that meant for us? Our churn's reduced. We're at 14%. The industry average is about 25%, so we're well below that. Obviously, we've increased people. Our proportion of those that identify as female is 51%, and it kind of hovers around 50%. It goes just above, just below, and that's perfect. We actually now have 55% of people who are people from the global majority. We've massively increased our revenue. We still haven't got full tracking on things like sexual orientation, religion, disability, ability, but they are being tracked as people come in. So we're evolving what we know of people as they're entering the capability, but we're not necessarily going back and asking everyone to kind of re-update their forms. I think we've done very, very well on everything with the exception of age. That is the axis that I think we need to work on. And I think part of that is because the industry, the advertising and marketing industry, it unfortunately skews really young, and that's the thing that we have to work on, in my view. I think we've kind of managed to get where we need to everywhere else, but that's now the focus. So if I was thinking about this from the very beginning again, I don't think I knew what I was doing until I was about halfway through doing it. So I didn't realize I was building the most diverse STEM team until I was kind of like, oh, actually, this is where we are. So I would ignore the typo. I would ask yourselves, what are you trying to achieve and why? Because there's no point doing this just for the sake of doing it. For me, it actually started from a place of reducing bias in our output. That was what I wanted to achieve. I was sick of kind of the headlines of this prediction's like disadvantageous to this group, or this kind of data product excluded this group, or all of that. And it kind of became super obvious with the A-level scandals that happened during COVID. And I just went, this shouldn't have happened. Like, this didn't need to happen. You could have had a data team that was looking at this from different angles. It just didn't need to happen. What are the current barriers that are stopping this, and what can you remove? So for us, it was that there was a university degree requirement and you actually just didn't need that. So we got rid of it, and everything else suddenly started to click into more place. And then what's the small thing that you can do today? And I think that can be everything from just kind of making things more transparent, working out how you can make the workday a little bit better for different people. And then also just working out what's important to you. This was what was important to me, and it doesn't necessarily have to be what's important to everyone else. And that's completely fine. But because I think it's important, it's allowed me to move at pace and kind of break things down where maybe I wouldn't have if it wasn't that important to me. But that's actually it. So over to questions, and I'll stop sharing so I can see everyone's faces.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Layla. I've got loads of questions, but I don't think I should go first. So options for people to put messages, put questions in the chat, and me and Ruth are happy to read them out, or put up your hand and we can invite people in. And if you need a couple of minutes to think of questions, I'm happy to ask one of mine. Cool. Right, I'll go first then. So I think that it was really interesting what you said about needing diversity, because you want your outputs and the outcomes to be better, because without knowing without representing communities, you can't, you know, you're not doing the right data analysis and stuff. Sort of, how do you though, have you got sort of a concrete example you can give us on where you've sort of seen that in action, where you guys have actually,
It's
the
really
decision
hard.
that was made was different as a result of the diversity in your team?
I think it's really hard to measure what didn't happen, and that's what we always struggle with, like what didn't happen that could have happened type thing. I think some of the interesting places where I've seen it come into effect is on BTEE, there was a campaign around hate, and it wasn't a data-driven idea until someone in the team was like, wait, data can actually help you do this, and it will be much more impactful if you start using data to bring in some of the feeds. So it actually just got entered into the creative idea of what the ultimate output was. One of the internal things, and this is probably the most obvious, was we were going to choose a bit of software that was going to be the operational software that we as a business were going to use. And actually someone put their hand up and just said, I don't think you should do that, because they've got some associations with organizations that are quite biased and doing things that we don't think are fair. And interestingly, it was people of color that put their hands up and said, I don't think we should be associated with this organization. And up until that point, they had half of the executive who were white going, I don't see any problems with this at all. And we actually didn't end up going with them as a provider because of that. So it was just being there and doing it. We do quite a lot of segmentations where we categorize different people into different groups. And I think the way we approach segmentation is much more reflective. So theoretically, the segmentation should be dictated by some kind of clustering, and the maths behind that will still spit out clusters, but how you present that and how you describe that and who you're kind of saying is your ideal group, I think is different because we are different. And that then feeds into how an organization is talking to or targeting their customer base as well.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. Thank you. So in the chat, we've had a question from Candy, who's asked about the Generation UK and Multiverse bootcamp. So I think from perhaps coming from the perspective, maybe of either supplier or as a person who might go on these schemes. Can you tell us a bit about that? And are they available free? I'm assuming not.
We pay Generation and we pay Multiverse per hire. The way that the payment for Multiverse works is a little bit different because we have an apprenticeship levy. So most organizations should have a pot of money. Once you hit a certain size, you need to put a pot of money aside for apprenticeships. Most organizations don't seem to use this levy. We still don't use all of our levy, but that's what we use to pay Multiverse. And then the apprentices are with us and fully salaried for the full duration of their apprenticeship program as well. So that's how the apprenticeships get funded through Multiverse. With Generation, it's a boot camp. So it's part funded through government grants, and then we part fund the boot camp as well. So we go at the start of every cohort. We think we want to take 4 boot campers at the end of the 12 weeks. And so we kind of loosely commit to that. And then when it gets to the end of the 12 weeks, we interview from the cohort and then we make the hire. And so we'll pay once we've made that hire. I imagine we could get out of it, but we never have. We always find people. And then once they start, they're fully paid. So when you're on Generation, I think because it's full-time, they do get financial support. And with the apprentices, because they're employed by us, they're getting fully salaried. And that's one of the other things, like if you think about, especially in marketing, the amount of free internships that used to exist, they're incredibly limiting from a socioeconomic perspective. Like you can't do a free, unpaid, 1 week, 2 week, 3 month internship if financially you haven't got the cover to do that. And so at that point, you are only pulling from certain socioeconomic backgrounds. So that was another thing that had to go. And that's why we go with generation, because they get rid of that problem. People are financially remunerated through the bootcamp.
Oh, that's great, Naila. Yeah, I have a question because to be honest, yeah, I'm a now student. I finished my master's in data science and analytics with advanced research. That was September 2022. And I can say that is actually very difficult, like securing a job as a data analyst because of not having an experience in the field here in the UK. And looking at apprenticeship, the one I've come across, they always ask for money and all of that, which is really very sad.
Yeah. And we don't use them. We won't use those providers.
Yeah, because I've been trying to develop my skills in all those, or what's it called, those tools that are necessary to get myself into roles and all of that, but it's just been difficult, yeah. And I feel that okay, I can explore the Generation UK and the Multiverse and see if I can get into their boot camp. But like you said, one of the concern is about going for an internship for maybe 6 months, and at the end of the day, you don't have money to like take care of yourself and all of that. And it's really one of the concerning issues as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think unfortunately there's still a lot of organizations that are doing that. But yeah, so Generation and Multiverse will not charge. And that's the point. And there's a lot of, because there's so many government grants now, especially around boot camps, I think there's a lot of people rushing in to supply them. I probably get one a month where someone reaches out and says, we can give you people, and then you unpick it and you go, no, wait, you're profit seeking. Like, this is not actually who we want to be associated with.
That's right. The boot camp, is it yearly or is it?
No, they're more frequent. So there's several boot camps. So everything from different engineering. So it could be like cloud, or it could be specific like AWS. We pull from one of the engineerings, and I'm forgetting which one, and we pull from the data and analytics boot camp, and they're run multi-yearly. So they have a few cohorts that go every year.
Oh, that's good. Thank you.
Can I ask a different question on something? So you said, Layla, that you didn't realize what you were doing till halfway through doing it, but you must have had backing for something from your own managers. So what was it that you were trying to do right at the outset? And did it take a lot of investment?
I think because there was such a skill shortage and it was costing us so much money to hire, so we were using external recruiters where you have to pay them a portion of their first year's salary. I was able to say, I think I have a way of reducing the financial costs that you've got against recruiters. And at the same time, I think we'll build a more representative data team. So it was quite fortunate that my CEO was a woman, and then my CEO's boss, the next level CEO, was a woman. So I think that they just generally care more about these types of things because they've come from a place where they've had to come up and they were the minority and they kind of know what they're coming up against. So they were very pro when you say, I'm going to save some money and I'm also going to kind of make us much more representative on lots of different axes. The reason I didn't realize what I was doing, I guess I did, but I didn't know I was trying to create the most diverse STEM team until about 2 years in. I was just going, if we are all of a sudden going to start bringing in all these other people, they should be representative. I don't want to just bring in the same cohort, because then I'm just creating a team of people that don't look like everyone else. They don't sound like everyone else. And I've just come from another agency where I had that and I didn't like it. And that's why it was lots of things coming together. But the investment, the thing that was hard to get buy-in to with the apprenticeship, we sell people effectively. We sell time and money, time and materials. And with apprentices, they're not billable for a year and a half. So we can't really sell their time. And the same can be said for people that come off the generation boot camp. They don't really make any money for about 6 months. So we're just covering the cost of the salary. And so where I did have to get buy-in was, don't hold me to them being billable until X date is up. And then by X date, I will make sure that they're billable. And that was the harder thing. But once it kind of was in flow, and we haven't had to use a recruiter for 2 years now, everyone's like, oh, okay, it works. So now it's fine. But at the time it was, yeah, it was a bit challenging.
And we've not got many questions from the audience. Do you want to go next, Catherine, or shall I go with my next one?
Well, my other question, I mean, it was really actually a question for the audience, which was related to, like, so many of those, you know, when you went through your cycles of the things that you did, like giving people those like brave spaces, or, you know, changing the way you socialize, all of those like little changes. I was just sort of wondering from anyone in the audience whether what WORAN can do to help support that sort of stuff. You know, is that the sort of thing we should be doing more to sort of showcase some of those, or sort of almost give people a bit of a toolkit of how to sort of introduce those sorts of things? Because it sounds like you've done like really amazingly well there, Lola. And I know in my organization we do a lot of those things, but it's not easy just to sort of say, oh, we're suddenly going to change the way we do things. You know, they take time, and it's almost like is there sort of support that people need with the sort of the hand holding part of that, because that could help us sort of think about our forward looking agenda for WORAN. Any thoughts from anyone? Again,
One of those I was interested in was the socializing during working hours, which I think is really will depend a lot on your employer's attitude to socializing, full stop. And your if you're in the sort of organization where they're expecting you to work a 10 or 12-hour day, and then the socializing is included in that, it's just extra pressure on people. So it has to be part of a bigger picture.
I also will say I couldn't have done this in my last organization because I didn't have enough power. And so when someone asked me, I was speaking at Black Tech Fest about a month ago, actually today, and someone came up and said, I'm starting out, I'm kind of a few years in, I find it really challenging. What should I focus on? And I said, don't focus on making other people understand why diversity is important. Don't focus on trying to change the organization. Just focus on getting as senior as you can, as fast as you can. And then when you get there, change it for someone else. Because if you spend all your time, this is my view, it might not be the right view, but if you spend all your time not doing the thing that will make you more senior and get you ahead in your career, and you try and change everyone else's view of what's important and why it should be important, all you're doing is getting left behind because you're spending energy on something that other people aren't having to do. So get as senior as you can, as fast as you can, and get as much power as you can, and get to a position where you can do things like, say, the entirety of the team is not going to be billable for this afternoon because we're doing a social event. And okay, slap my hands, but what are you going to do? You're not, there's nothing you're going to do. Like, we perform, you won't even reprimand me for this, but I have the power to say the entire capability won't be billable for half the day because this is something I think is important. But I couldn't have done that 5 years ago. I just didn't have the authority to do that. So then I think it's like, what are the things that you can do within your current authority? And if it isn't anything at this point, then that's okay. Get to a place as fast as you possibly can where you can do that, and then make it safe for other people.
Excellent. The other thing I say is that, you know, it's that ask for forgiveness rather than permission. So,
Totally.
because if you say, can we do this, then someone will almost certainly say, oh, that doesn't sound like it. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah.
Whereas if you do it and it, you know, positive outcome, everyone's a winner. Negative outcome, you say, oh, well, we'll do it differently next time.
So those hoodies have been such an issue of contention at the agency that they had to change the expense policy this year because so many people complained outside of data, because they all got so upset that they didn't have hoodies. All the other team leads and chief execs were like, well, my team's complained because we can't give them hoodies. And I just went, well, stop spending all your money on alcohol. And they went, we can't do that. And I was like, well, so they got the policy changed. But that's okay. I'm now looking for what's the next thing to get the policy changed.
Fantastic, thank you. Jana, please come in before we finish.
Just a quick one. Leila, you mentioned something about the human library, I think you called it.
Yeah.
I tried to have a quick look, but I'm not sure I'm fully grasping the idea. Do you mind just talking a little bit about it?
Yeah, so it's actually kind of it's Brave Spaces, and Brave Spaces, I think, came from our version of the human library. But basically, it's an organization that finds people with just absolutely incredible stories. And then they anonymously will tell their story to a group of people online, and you can ask them questions. And the stories range from, I mean, they're just so incredible. Like people that have, you know, changed the world, or they've been through conflict, or they've just something where you just wouldn't otherwise understand and experience all the context of that. And when we did it, it was during COVID. So I think I remember the human library story I heard. I'm pretty sure it was a refugee, and just the story of kind of coming to the UK. And lots of people have issues with refugees, but they've probably never actually talked to a refugee or understood their story. And the same can be said for lots of things. Like there's people that have, you know, homophobia or racism, or they just don't really understand the viewpoint of someone else. And so the human library is just about going, here is someone's story, so that you can have an understanding of who they are and what they've been through, so that you're a bit more open-eyed towards it. And so that's kind of where Brave Spaces became the digitized version of the human library, where people could volunteer to do that. But it's not anonymous, because, you know, you've got to work with your colleagues, which is why I think they're exceptionally brave to do it. And I just have such awe of the people that have put their hands up to do it.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, Leila, we've run over time, but that was so fascinating. Thank you so much for spending all that time with us today. I think we're, you know, round of applause for Leila, brilliant. Really good session, really good session. I've put a link to the feedback form in the chat if people can do that. Here we go, we got virtual round of applause as well. And just to close the session, Ruth already mentioned it, but we've got the upcoming Christmas social, which is combined with WORAN, Wisdom and Worms. And it's not an alcohol related, you know, it's an online fun reflection on the year, you know, games and stuff like that. So yeah, good, or hopefully a fully inclusive celebration, festive celebration. And then we've got a full packed agenda for next year for events. So hopefully see you all at the next one of our events just before Christmas, which is on the 6th of December. But yeah, thanks again, Leila. Cheers all.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.